I have a story for you today. From the very beginning, people have been aware of God. They could feel Him, though they could not see Him. And they were always asking in their different languages who He was and where He was to be found. Who is God? They asked their wise men. He's the most perfect of beings, was the answer. But what does He look like? Has He a body like us? No, He has not got a body like us. He has no eyes to see like ours, no hands to work, and no feet to walk with like ours. But He sees everything and knows everything, even our most secret thoughts. And where is He? He is in heaven and on this earth. He is everywhere. What can He do? Whatever He wishes. But what has God actually done? What He has done is all that has ever happened. He's the creator and master who has made everything, and all things He has made obey His will. He cares and provides for them all and keeps the whole of His creation in the most wonderful harmony and order. In the beginning, there was only God. Since He was completely perfect and completely happy, there was nothing He needed. Yet, out of His goodness, He chose to create, and all He willed came into being. The heavens and the earth, and all that is visible and invisible. One after another, He made the light, the stars, the sky, and the earth with its plants and animals. Last of all, He made human beings. Man, like the animals, was made out of the particles of the earth, but God made him different from animals and like Himself, for into His body, which would die, He breathed a soul which would never die. Many people thought this was just a tale. How could someone with no hands and no eyes make things? If God is a spirit who cannot be seen or touched or heard, how could He have made the stars that sparkle overhead, the sea, which is always astir, the trees, the flowers, and the scent they shed around them? Perhaps you could make invisible things, but how could He make the visible world? It is all very well, they thought, to say that God is everywhere, but who has ever set his eyes on Him? How can we be sure He is everywhere? They tell us He is a master whom everybody and everything obeys. Why on earth should we believe that? And really, it does seem impossible. We who have hands could not do these things. So how could someone who has no hands do them? And can we imagine animals and plants and rocks obeying God? The animals do not understand when we talk to them. So could they be obedient? Or the winds and the sea and the mountains? You can shout and scream and wave your arms at them, but they cannot hear you, for they are not even alive. And they certainly won't obey you. Yes, this is how it seems to us. But as you shall see, everything that exists, whether it has life or not, in all that it does, and by the very fact of being there, actually obeys the will of God. God's creatures do not know that they are obeying. Those that are inanimate just go on existing. Those that have life move and go on living. Yet, every time a cool wind brushes your cheek, his voice, if you could hear it, is saying, Lord, I obey. When the sun rises in the morning and covers the glittering sea, the sun and its rays and the water also are whispering, my Lord, I obey. And when you can see birds on the wing, or a fruit falling from a tree, or a butterfly hovering over a flower, the birds and their flight, the tree and the fruit and its fall to the ground, the butterfly and the flower and its fragrance are all repeating the same words. I hear, my Lord, and I obey. At first, there was chaos and darkness was on the face of the deep. God said, let there be light, and there was light. Before that, there was only the deep and immensity of space with no beginning and no end, indescribably dark and cold. Who can imagine that immensity, that darkness and coldness? When you think of the dark, we think of night, but our night will be like brilliant sunshine in comparison with that darkness. When we think of cold, we think of ice, but ice is positively hot if you compare it with the coldness of space, the space that separates the stars. You might say the stars are as a blazing furnace from which no heat can escape. In this measureless void of cold and darkness, light was created. There appeared something like a vast fiery cloud which included all the stars that are in the sky. The whole universe was in that cloud, and among the tiniest of stars was our own world. But there were no stars then. As yet, there was nothing except light and heat. So intense was the heat that all the substances we know today, iron, gold, earth, rocks, water, existed as gases, as insubstantial as air. They were fused together in one vast flaming intensity of light and heat. Heat which would make our sun today feel like a piece of ice. This raging, fiery cloud of nothingness, too huge to imagine, moved in the immensity of freezing space, which was also nothingness but infinitely vaster. The fiery mass was no bigger than a drop of water in that ocean of space. As this cloud of light and heat moved through the empty space, little drops fell from it, like if you swing some water out of a glass. Some of it holds together and the rest breaks up into little drops. The countless hosts of stars are like these little drops. Only instead of falling, they are moving around in space in such a way that they can never meet. They are millions of miles from each other. Some stars are so far away from us that it takes millions of years for their light to reach us. Even though light travels 186,000 miles in 1 second, God gave them special laws which they have always obeyed. They seem free, whirling dizzily through space with nothing to stop them, but they are all tied to their courses by an invisible string, which is the will of God. 2 of these drops were our earth and our sun, which move on their courses through space. The earth moves round the sun, but it travels like a spinning ball, ceaselessly revolving around itself and always revolving at the same speed. When God's will called the stars into being, there was no detail He had not planned. Every scrap of the universe, every speck which we might think too tiny to matter, was bound to behave according to the rules He had made. For the drop of blazing cloud which became our world, He decided that there should be no longer confusion or chaos. Instead of a burning confusion of gases, there was to be air and water and rocks. To the little particles which are like smoke, like vapor, which could only be distinguished as light and heat moving at a fantastic speed, He said, as you become cold, you shall come closer and become smaller. And so, as they cooled, they moved more and more slowly, clinging closer and closer to each other, occupying less and less space. The particles assumed different states, which man called the solid, the liquid, and gaseous space. We have gas here. So everything we know is either a gas, a liquid, or a solid. Which of these 3 states it is at any moment depends on how hot or cold it is. Then God gave other instructions. Each of the tiny particles was given a special love for certain particles and a special dislike for certain others. Some were attracted to each other and some were not. Just like human beings, they like some and refuse to have anything to do with others. So these particles, some of them liked, just like you see here. You can see the particles. Some of them are attracted to one another, and some are, look at this, they're attracted to themselves. Here they're attracted to themselves. Look at here, they're attracted to themselves. And look at this one, doesn't have any other one, just one wants to be on its own. So this is how the particles behave to one another. Some get attracted to one another, as you can see, and some refuse to have anything to do with any particle. They are just on their own. In this way, they combined and formed themselves into different groups. In the solid state, God has made particles cling so closely together that they are almost impossible to separate. In the solid state, God has made particles to cling so closely together, just as you see this solid. It's impossible to separate them. they form a body which will not alter its shape unless we apply some force. Look at this solid. It can never alter its shape. If I try to break it off, it will still remain together. The particles will still remain together. So the particles in solid cling very tightly together. But in case of the particles in liquid, God said, hold together also, but not very closely. So for the particles of liquid, they are rolling together. And again, God said, you shall flow, the particles will flow and spread and fill every hollow, every crevice in their path. God said, you will push downwards and sideways, but never upwards. So as I said, this like the particles of the liquid, and that is why I can put my hand in it. You can see, because they are not tightly fixed together. I can put my hand inside this water because the particles are not tightly fixed together. But then I cannot put my hand right through this stone because the particles are tightly put together. Even if we consider this solid, I can't put my hand right through. Can't put my hand right through this solid because the particles are tightly fixed together, obeying the law of God. Now again, as I said, for the particles of liquid, God said you can push downwards and sideways but never upwards. You can see the particles of liquids can go sideways, they can move downwards, but they can never go upwards. So these are the laws that God gave the particles in a liquid. To the particles of gases, God said, your particles shall not cling together at all. They can move freely in all directions.
Smells nice.
Yes, because the particles of gases move freely in all directions, obeying the law of God. But as the particles were also different individuals, they did not become liquid or solid or gas all at the same time. At a certain temperature, some remained solid, others became liquid, and still others became gases. And so while obeying these laws, the little drop of nothingness that was to become our world, the blazing mass, went on spinning and spinning around itself and around the sun in the tremendous cold of the space. Now let me demonstrate to you how the particles don't have to be all at the same time, solids or gases or liquids. So we see that God has said that the particles are not supposed to be solid at the same time. It depends on the temperature or liquid. Look at this. We have this solid, we have this solid. Now as the temperature is changing, you can see this solid becoming liquid and this solid remains solid. You can see they are obeying the law of God. Now this solid has become liquid, but this remains solid. You can see. So this is the law that God has given them, that they should not all be gases or liquid or solid at the same time. It depends on the temperature. At a particular temperature, some will be solid, some will be gases, and some will be liquid. You can see this. Now this remains solid, and this has changed. This solid has melted to become liquid. And then you can see now You can see the smoke coming out, the gases. So this is the law that God has given them. Another law that God gave the particles in a liquid to obey that I didn't mention earlier on is that they should not have any shape. They will only have the shape of any container that they are in. So we see this liquid, it has the shape of this container. This another liquid has the shape of this container. This another liquid has the shape of this container. So that's another law that the particles of liquid obey. They don't have any shape of their own, but they take the shape of any container that they are put into. Unlike the solids, solids have definite shapes of theirs. Just like this one, it has a definite shape. You can see that it has a definite shape. But liquids don't have their own shape. They only take up the shapes of the containers into which they are put. That's another law that these particles obey, as God has given them. And God gave another law. He said to the particles, all of you shall have weight, but you will not all have the same weight. And those that are heavier will attract those that are light. Now, in obeying the law of God, so the heavier particles, what happened? They sink to the bottom. That's another law that God gave these particles. The heavier ones sink to the bottom, and the lighter ones, the lighter particles, float. See, that is another law that God gave these particles. See the heavier ones right at the bottom, the lighter ones right at the top. And no matter what we do, if I shake, you will see they will obey the law of God. The heavier ones will still sink to the bottom, and the lighter ones go up. So similarly, the heavier liquids now sank towards the center of the earth, and those liquids that are lighter floated above them like the oil that floated on the water. This way, they formed layers. The heavier ones move towards the center, and the lighter liquids get above them, and this way we have layers and layers. The lighter ones are the ones right above, while the heavier ones move towards the center. This is another law that God gave these particles. If you put your hand into ice cold water, it becomes cold. For the same reason, the stars and the sun and the earth gradually grew colder as time went on, and the smaller balls cooled more quickly than the larger balls. Look at our earth here in comparison with the sun. You can see how tiny our earth is. Look at how large the sun is if you compare it with our tiny earth. So as these stars started spinning, the smaller ones, just like our earth, very tiny, started getting colder and colder. And so while obeying these laws, the little drop of nothingness that was to become our world, the blazing mass, went on spinning and spinning around itself and around the sun in the tremendous cold of the space. And as time went on, the outer ring of this mass began to dance, a dance of the elements. So can you imagine the dance of the elements? The particles that were at the outermost part of the edge became cold. When the particles become cold, they go right down. And when they get to the earth, they will have to obey the law of God. They get lighter and move up again. And then in outer space, they get cold. And then, in order to obey the law of God, they move down to the earth again. So as time went on, this dance continued. The particles will get down to the earth surface. Once they get hot, they get lighter and they soar up. And once they get into outer space, they get cold and they will need to obey the law of God. They get heavy and they move down to the earth. And this dance of the element went on and on and on for a long, long time. How marvelous it is and how simple. If you become hot, you expand. And as you expand, you become lighter and soar upwards. Just like I showed you in this chart, I showed you here before. As they expand, they get lighter and they move up. And once they get heavy, they get cold, they get heavy, they move down like that. That is a marvelous rule that God gave them. And as time went on and on and on, they became tired. Like tired dancers, they became cold. And of course, to obey the law, when you get cold, you shrink and you fall as a grain of sand sinks to the bottom of a pond. Because of this law, the earth gradually changed from a ball of fire, as I showed in the chart, to the earth we know today. This was the law that the tiny radiant particles obeyed as they danced their dance. Particles too minute to be seen or even imagined, yet numerous enough to have produced the world. For hundreds, thousands, millions of years, this dance went on. Finally, the particles settled down like tired dancers, and one after another, they became first liquid and then solid. And as they became solid or liquid, some of them joined others to which they were attracted, forming new substances. The heavier ones went near the heart of the earth, and the lighter ones floated above them like oil floating on water, just as I've shown you. A thin scum was formed like the skin which formed on this. Look at it, a thin scum was formed like we have the skin here. It seemed as if the earth had taken some shape, but the elements inside this skin were still very hot and felt trapped. They wanted to get out. So even though a thin skin was formed, the element right inside were still very hot and felt trapped and needed to expand. Of course, God had already given them the rule that they had to follow. If you are hot, you expand. There was no place to expand, and so they burst out. They broke the skin, and it was like a terrible fight. was like a terrible fight. So this happened because the particle just had to obey the law of God. If they are hot, you stand. So they had to just bust the skin. So this happened because the particle just had to obey the law of God. If they are hot, you stand. So they had to just bust the skin. They broke out. So as this terrible fight went on, the water that formed on the surface turned immediately into vapor and went up as the hot stuff came out from inside the earth. There were also ashes. A veil of cloud was drawn to cover the earth so that nobody could see what was going on. The sun was ashamed of them. So a veil of cloud was drawn to cover the earth so that nobody could see what was going on. The sun was ashamed of them. Eventually the fighting ceased. As everybody cooled down, more and more gases became liquid, more and more liquids became solids. The earth itself shrank and became wrinkled like an old apple that had been left in a cupboard. The wrinkles are the mountains. And the hollows are the oceans. For as soon as the rocks had cooled down, water was able to return to the earth, and it rained and rained and rained, and the water being liquid filled every hollow and crevice it found in its path. Thus the oceans were formed. Above them was air, the air we breathe. The cloud had disappeared. No more cloud. The veil was withdrawn. The sun could once again smile upon his little daughter, the earth. Rocks, water, air, solids, liquids, and gases. Today, as it was yesterday and millions of years ago, God's laws are obeyed in the self-same way. The world spins round itself and round the sun. And today, as it was millions of years ago, the earth and all the elements and compounds it is made of, as they fulfill their task, whisper with one voice, Lord, thy will be done. We obey. That is my story for you today. I have another story for you very soon.